Welcome to the adventure of the Silent Orchestra, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Sherlock Holmes, The Eastern Enigma, Tales from the Great Hiatus, playing in the year 1893. For years, the world believed my friend Sherlock Holmes had perished at the Reichenbach Falls. It was only recently, in his old travel trunk, that I discovered a set of journals from that great hiatus. Written in a cipher only Mycroft's resources could help me break, they reveal his secret travels through the enigmatic East, a time when the master of logic confronted the ancient mysteries of a world far from Baker Street. The first of these extraordinary tales, which I now present from his decoded notes, I have called The Adventure of the Silent Orchestra. Chapter 1. From the Journal of the Naturalist Sigerson. August the 12th. The heat in this Dutch possession is a tangible thing, a wet blanket, smothering thought and encouraging indolence. Yet, even in this oppressive humidity, the work proceeds. The Phalaenopsis amabilis, the moon orchid, reveals its delicate structure under my lens, a marvel of natural engineering. The air, thick with the scent of clove and damp earth, is rarely silent. A ceaseless thrumming of insects forms the background to my days, punctuated by the startling cry of a hornbill or the rustle of some unseen creature in the dense undergrowth. This morning, a sound entirely out of place interrupted the jungle symphony. The crisp, rhythmic crunch of military boots on the path to my bungalow. The intrusion announced a uniformed Javanese constable, his face beaded with sweat, bearing a summons from the local administrative authority. An hour later, I stepped into an office that was the very antithesis of the world outside. The vibrant symphony of the jungle vanished, replaced by a stifling quiet, broken only by the lazy, rhythmic creak of a large ceiling fan. Here all was dry order and muted tones. Behind a vast teak desk sat Chief Inspector Johnson, a man who seemed baked into his starched white uniform. Portly, with a face the colour of parchment, he constantly mopped at his brow with a linen handkerchief. "Mr. Sigerson, thank you for coming at such short notice. A matter of local unpleasantness. You are a man of science, I am told, an expert in the natural world," responded Chief Inspector Jansen. "I am a botanist, Chief Inspector. My expertise is in the classification of flora, not local affairs," observed Sherlock Holmes. He waved a dismissive hand, the gesture heavy with fatigue. For a moment the only sounds were the shuffling of his papers and the ceaseless creak of the fan overhead. "Precisely. A man of facts. Here Van der Fort is dead, the owner of the largest sugar plantation on the island. Found this morning in his study, not a mark on him. The local doctor, a man more familiar with malaria than malfeasance, says his heart simply gave out. Fright, he calls it." Chief Inspector Jansen answered. I remained silent, allowing him to continue. It is often in the unsolicited details that the truth begins to germinate. A man frightened to death in his own locked study presents a curious problem, though not unheard of for one with a weak constitution. The natives, of course, have a more colourful explanation. They speak of a gamelan of ghosts, an orchestra that plays without musicians. They claim it was heard from the direction of the plantation house just before dawn. A deathly tune, they say. It is the same foolish story they tell whenever a tyrant meets his end, replied Chief Inspector Jansen. A profound administrative weariness laced his tone, yet my ear detected something more. He presented this spectral orchestra not as a mystery to be solved, but as a conclusion already reached, a convenient narrative to close a difficult file. Here Van der Voort was a notoriously cruel man. His death would not be mourned, and a ghost is an assailant against whom no charges can be filed. Order is maintained. All I require, Mr. Sigerson, is a man of European science to visit the estate, confirm the doctor's findings, and add his signature to a report stating the death is from natural causes. It will quell the rumours and satisfy my superiors in Batavia. A simple formality. A simple formality. He wished to use the name of science to sanctify a superstition. An orchestra without musicians. The problem was absurd, illogical, and therefore utterly fascinating. My orchid monograph could wait. A puzzle of a far more complex and compelling nature had just presented itself. My friend Sherlock Holmes recounted the events of this singular case to me long after his return from his travels, during which the world believed him to be dead. He spoke of it one evening in our familiar Baker Street rooms, the London fog pressing against the window panes. It was a world away from the oppressive heat he described. He had adopted the persona of a Norwegian botanist, Sigerson, and it was under this guise that his narrative began, not in London, but in Batavia, with the unctuous appeal of the local chief inspector. So, here, Sigerson, you will consent to look into this unfortunate business. A man of science such as yourself will surely see the truth of it. A weak heart, a fright from some local tale. A tragedy, but a simple one, answered Chief Inspector Jansen. The Chief Inspector's tone was altogether too unctuous, too eager for a swift conclusion. Holmes, peering at a specimen of Phalaenopsis amabilis through his lens, did not look up immediately. When he did, his grey eyes were sharp and devoid of botanical interest. An unexplained death which benefits from a superstitious explanation is a circumstance of the greatest interest, Inspector. I should be delighted to offer my observations, observed Sherlock Holmes. The journey to the Van der Voort plantation was an ordeal in itself. In a stifling box of wicker and worn leather, the carriage rattled along a track that was little more than a wound carved into the jungle's flesh. The air, thick as syrup, hummed with the incessant, high-pitched drone of 1,000 unseen insects, a sound that vibrated in one's very bones. On either side, the vegetation pressed close, a suffocating wall of green from which the shrieks of birds would occasionally erupt, only to be swallowed by the silence that followed. On either side, the vegetation pressed close, a suffocating wall of green from which the shrieks of birds would occasionally erupt, only to be swallowed by the silence that followed. You see the isolation? It is a breeding ground for these ghost stories. A formal report confirming death by natural causes, exacerbated by native fancies, would quiet the matter for the authorities in Batavia. It is a question of maintaining order, Chief Inspector Johnson answered. Holmes noted that the man spoke not as a seeker of truth, but as a politician managing a delicate situation. What Jansen sought was not an investigation, but a validation. a scientific signature upon a death certificate already written in his own mind. Order is one thing, Inspector. Truth is quite another. And I have found that the latter, though often inconvenient, is a far more stable foundation for the former, observed Sherlock Holmes. Jansen fell into a quiet, uneasy contemplation. After another mile, the jungle gave way abruptly to the cultivated order of the plantation, where endless fields of sugar-cane, unnaturally green, stretched towards a great white house that shimmered in the heat. It stood silent and imposing, its windows like vacant eyes, staring out over the domain of the man it had last held. The monotonous hum of the jungle was replaced by an even more unnerving stillness, broken only by the crunch of the carriage wheels on the white coral drive as they drew to a halt before the main entrance. Holmes stepped down from the carriage, his lean figure a stark silhouette against the oppressive brightness. His eyes surveyed the grand facade, a house built on fear and sugar, now supposedly home to a ghost. The front door stood closed, a dark and silent mouth, promising nothing. The overture is concluded, Inspector. Let us now attend the performance, Sherlock Holmes said. The study of the late Herr van der Fort was a tomb sealed against the Javanese heat. Heavy teak shutters barred the windows, trapping a stale, oppressive air that hung thick with the cloying sweetness of local cigars and something altogether more grim. The body had been removed, yet the shadow of its presence remained, etched into the very atmosphere of the room. A single bluebottle fly buzzed a maddening solo near the ceiling, the only sound to break the profound stillness. My friend Sherlock Holmes stood in the centre of the room, his tall, gaunt frame a stark silhouette against the light from the open doorway. His eyes, bright and alert, missed nothing. They swept from the heavy brocade curtains to the ornate writing desk, and finally to the deep leather armchair where the master of the house had met his end. He moved then, not with the hesitant tread of an ordinary man in a place of death, but with the quiet, purposeful glide of a naturalist stalking a rare specimen. They say he was frightened to death, Watson, and yet fear leaves no material trace. We must search for the instrument which induced it, Sherlock Holmes said. He circled the room, his fingertips brushing lightly against a bookshelf, his head tilted as if listening to a secret conversation held by the inanimate objects. He paused near the desk, his sharp nose twitching. He drew in a long, deliberate breath. "Curious. Do you not detect it?" observed Sherlock Holmes. "I smell only stale tobacco and the oppressive heat, Holmes," I confessed. Dr. John Watson added. "More than that," he murmured, almost to himself. "Faint but unmistakable. The clean, medicinal scent of camphor oil. An antiseptic aroma, quite out of place amidst the opulent decay of this study. It is the first discordant note, Watson, in this funereal composition," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I watched him, fascinated. To me, it was merely a faint, clean smell. To Holmes, it was a thread, and I could see in the sudden, intense focus of his eyes that his mind was already pulling at it, sensing the vast and complex tapestry to which it was attached. His attention, thus directed, now settled upon the great mahogany desk, a monument to its late owner's life, a chaos of ledgers, shipping manifests, and unanswered letters. Holmes began to sift through the papers with a controlled precision, his long, nimble fingers sorting and discarding with astonishing rapidity, clearly searching for something specific. The dry rustle of paper was a furtive whisper in the quiet room. Presently he extracted a single sheet, holding it up to the sliver of light from the door. He read it through in a moment, his expression hardening into one of intense concentration. He then passed it to me without a word. It was from a physician in Batavia, written in a precise, spidery script, detailing Herr van der Voort's severe cardiac condition, a specific and volatile arrhythmia prone to catastrophic failure under conditions of extreme shock or stress. The contents were stark and clinical, a grim prognosis laid bare. "Precisely," he replied, his tone sharp with discovery. "And this letter provides us with the fuse. A man with such a precarious hold on life would not be careless. He would keep his remedy close at hand, would he not?" observed Sherlock Holmes. His gaze darted about the room, no longer taking in the whole, but searching for something specific. It landed upon the desk once more. He ran his hand along the ornate carvings on its side, his fingers probing and tapping. A faint click, barely audible, rewarded his efforts. A small, cunningly concealed panel sprang open beneath the lip of the desk. From within the recess, Holmes withdrew a small, dark glass vial, no bigger than my thumb. He held it up. Inside, a clear liquid sloshed gently. It was the man's medication, a potent digitalis compound meant to regulate the heart in an emergency. It was untouched. He was not merely frightened, Watson. He was assaulted by a terror so sudden and so absolute that he had not a single second to reach for the very thing that might have saved his life. We now know the precise nature of the lock. We must find the man who forged the key. We found the heir to the Van der Voort estate, a young man named Peter, not in some darkened room of mourning, but upon the wide shaded veranda. The air, thick with the scent of frangipani and the ceaseless shrill drone of cicadas, did not so much hang as press down upon us. He was a slight, almost willowy figure, dressed in immaculate white linen that seemed wholly unsuited to the oppressive climate. He did not rise as we approached, but merely gestured with a languid hand towards two vacant rattan chairs. "Ah, Monsieur Sigerson, is it not? The botanist. My late uncle mentioned you. Do forgive me for not standing. The heat, you understand. It saps the very will," replied Peter van der Voort. His voice, a carefully modulated tenor, carried a faint accent more of the European salon than the colonial frontier. Before him, on a low teak table, sat a collection of exquisite porcelain butterflies, their painted wings shimmering in the dappled light. He picked one up with a delicate touch, his attention seemingly absorbed by the fragile object. "A tragic business, Herr van der Voort. I offer my sincerest condolences. I had hoped to consult your uncle on the subject of local orchidaceae," stated Sherlock Holmes. "Orchids, yes. He was a man of singular passions, as am I," said Peter van der Voort. He set the butterfly down with exaggerated care, its porcelain base making the faintest clink against the wood. His eyes, pale and distant, drifted over his collection. "They are so very delicate, you see. A life's work to acquire such perfection. And yet even the slightest tremor can shatter the most beautiful things. "A lesson this land is forever teaching," remarked Peter van der Voort. The comment hung in the humid air, seemingly a piece of idle philosophy. Holmes, however, leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed upon the young man. For a moment, the rhythmic creak of his rattan chair was the only sound, besides the ever-present insects. "A tremor, you say? The servants speak of a different sort of disturbance, of music," declared Sherlock Holmes. "The gamelan of ghosts," Peter van der Voort replied. He sighed, a sound of practised weariness, and waved a dismissive hand. "A local superstition. Fanciful, of course, but what is one to do? The people here are steeped in such things. They believe the island itself passed judgment upon him," answered Peter van der Voort. Holmes reached into the pocket of his Norfolk jacket and produced the small vial of medication we had discovered in the study. He placed it upon the table next to a cobalt-blue butterfly. "I came across this in your uncle's desk. It suggests a more terrestrial vulnerability," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. Peter glanced at the vial, and for the first time a flicker of genuine animation entered his eyes. He picked it up, a knowing, almost sad smile touching his lips. "Ah, his digitalis. Yes, his heart was a faulty engine, always threatening to seize. The doctor in Batavia warned him constantly. A sudden shock, a moment of extreme terror, it would be more than enough. Does that not lend credence to the local folklore? What could be more terrifying than a summons from the spirit world, played upon their own infernal instruments?" replied Peter van der Voort. Peter presented the argument with an air of unassailable logic, using the very evidence of his uncle's weakness to bolster the supernatural tale. He seemed to be a man entirely convinced, or at least one committed to the performance of it. Holmes retrieved the vial and stood, the interview apparently concluded. "You have been most helpful, Herr van der Voort. Your perspective is invaluable," explained Sherlock Holmes. As we walked away, the sound of the cicada seemed to swell, filling the silence between us. Once we were out of earshot, beyond the manicured lawns, and back on the dusty track that led towards the plantation workers' quarters, Holmes spoke, his voice low and sharp. "A man's grief is a difficult thing to feign, Watson. But a man's indifference, dressed up as philosophical acceptance, that is a performance which requires a very particular sort of artist. The nephew speaks of spirits and superstition. Let us now go and hear the tale from those who are said to fear them most." Leaving the unsettling civility of Peter van der Voort, Holmes led me away from the grand plantation house. The air grew thick, heavy with the sweet, cloying scent of raw sugar. Our path took us towards the servants' quarters, a collection of humble dwellings that seemed to cower under the immense rustling canopy of the cane fields. From the fields came an incessant sound, a dry, whispering hiss that rose and fell with the breeze, as if the very land were sharing a secret. The quarters themselves spoke volumes of their inhabitants' lives, clean but threadbare, orderly yet suffused with a palpable sense of weariness. An elderly man, his face a road-map of wrinkles, greeted us at the threshold of the main building. He bowed low, his hands clasped, though his eyes darted nervously towards the fields behind us. His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to his usual incisive tone. "We have come to understand what happened to your master. We are told there was music, remarked Sherlock Holmes. A ripple of fear passed through the small group that had gathered. The old man swallowed hard, the sound audible in the quiet room. From the shadows, more figures shuffled in, a flimsy door creaking on its leather hinges behind them. The old man spoke in a low, trembling voice. "It is not music for the living, Tuan. It is the gamelan of the ghosts. It plays only for the dying. It played for Heer van der Voort," plantation servant answered. An old woman, shrouded in a dark sarong, pushed forward. Her eyes were bright and fierce, yet held a deep-seated terror. Her voice was a reedy whisper, yet it carried an undeniable conviction. No hands touch the instruments. The sound comes from the air, from the ground itself. It is a warning from the spirits of this place. The master, he angered them. He took too much from the earth, plantation servant said. Holmes listened with an unnerving stillness, his gaze sweeping not over their faces, but over their hands, their bare feet, the carefully mended fabric of their clothes. He absorbed details quite apart from their supernatural tale. After a long moment of silence, punctuated only by the sibilant rustle of the cane outside, he inclined his head. "I see. And does anyone here know of a man who understands the spirits? A man wise in the old ways," observed Sherlock Holmes. They murmured a name, passing it from one to another in a hushed and reverent chain. Raden Saleh. The old man, confirming, nodded slowly. "The Dukan. He lives by the old temple. He understands the whispers of the earth," plantation servant said. We took our leave, and as we walked back towards the main path, the sound of the wind in the sugar-cane seemed to swell around us. I confess, the unified terror of the servants had left me with a distinct sense of unease. Holmes, however, showed no such disquiet. On the contrary, he seemed energized by the encounter. "Did you observe it, Watson?" he asked abruptly, his voice sharp with purpose once more. Explained Sherlock Holmes. "Observe what, Holmes? A group of terrified people steeped in superstition, I should say," Dr. John Watson added. No, you see, but you do not observe. Look past their fear. Did you not see the knife handle by the door, worn smooth by a generation of hands? The woven mat, repaired with a dozen different colors of thread? These are not people broken by fear. They endure. Their terror is genuine, I grant you, but beneath it lies a deep and profound resentment. It is the resentment of a people who have been wronged, but have not forgotten how to mend, how to sharpen, how to wait. That, my dear fellow, is a far more potent force than any ghost," Sherlock Holmes noted. He stopped, turning to look back towards the hazy mountains visible beyond the endless fields of green. "The whispers of the earth," he mused, almost to himself. "An interesting turn of phrase. Not the air, Watson, but the earth. We are not hunting a phantom orchestra. We are hunting a physicist. Our next call must be upon this Raden Saleh," deduced Sherlock Holmes. The simmering resentment I had observed amongst the plantation workers was a tangible thing, a heat rising from the earth alongside the oppressive humidity. This sentiment, as much as any spectral tale, led Holmes to seek out the man known as Raden Saleh. We left the manicured tyranny of the Van der Voort estate, following a winding path where the air grew thick with clove and damp soil. The jungle's ceaseless rhythmic chirping closed in around us. Sala's dwelling was no European house, but a structure of dark teak and woven bamboo that seemed to grow from the clearing itself. Here the world felt calmer, more ancient. An old man with skin like wrinkled parchment and placid, deep-set eyes greeted us. The very picture of serenity, he sat upon a woven mat and gestured for us to be seated. The only sound was the whisper of a breeze through the bamboo walls. My friend began, adopting the dry, academic tone of the botanist Sigerson. "We have come to learn of the local beliefs, good sir. I am told the spirits of this place are restless," replied Sherlock Holmes. Raden Saleh did not answer directly. He simply inclined his head, a faint, knowing smile touching his lips. He poured us a pale, fragrant tea into small, handleless cups. His voice, when it came, was soft, yet carried an undeniable weight. "There is a story I might tell, Tuan. It concerns the great serpent who sleeps in the cool earth. He has no ears to hear the hunter's call, no nose to smell the coming rains," said Raden Saleh. I glanced at Holmes, noting the flicker of keen impatience he reserved for what he deemed irrelevant preamble. He wanted facts, timelines, and tangible clues, not allegorical tales. "Yet," the old man continued, his gaze steady, "the serpent knows when the tiger walks the earth 50 paces away. He knows when the buffalo herd runs. He knows, for the world speaks to him through his whole body. He listens not with ears, but with his bones," responded Raden Saleh. The scientist in Holmes could not be suppressed. His reply was sharp, a reflex of logic. "He feels the vibration through the ground, a simple matter of physics." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. "Physics," the mystic repeated, tasting the word. "A good name for it. The earth speaks a language that is not for the ears alone. Men build great houses of stone, and in doing so they forget how to listen as the serpent does. They trust only what enters the ear gate, and this is their great folly. When the ground itself cries out against a great cruelty to one, it does not always use a voice a man can hear," remarked Raden Saleh. In that instant, a profound change came over my friend. The mask of Sigerson the botanist dissolved, revealing the raw, piercing intellect of Sherlock Holmes. He leaned forward, his teacup forgotten. The old man's parable was no longer folklore to be catalogued, but a signpost pointing to a truth he had overlooked. A physical truth masquerading as mysticism. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of its earlier condescension, replaced by a low tone of dawning respect. "You describe a phenomenon, sir, which may well wear the mask of a legend. A most intriguing proposition," stated Sherlock Holmes. We departed soon after, walking in silence back towards the oppressive order of the plantation. The jungle's incessant hum seemed different now, no longer mere sound, but evidence of 1,000 unseen vibrations. I could see Holmes's magnificent mind working furiously, his brow furrowed as he connected the mystic's words to the stark reality of the crime. He stopped abruptly as the main house came into view, his grey eyes alight with a familiar fire. "Watson, we have been deaf," he declared, his voice a tense whisper. "Utterly and completely deaf. We have been chasing a phantom orchestra when we should have been feeling the floorboards tremble. We must return to Vandervort's study at once. There is a fine layer of dust I must re-examine, not with my eyes, but with my bones," Sherlock Holmes said. The mystic Raiden Salles words seemed to follow us from his shadowed garden, clinging to the humid air like jasmine and clove. Sherlock Holmes had been uncharacteristically silent since our interview, his brow furrowed in a concentration so profound I dared not disturb it. It was late afternoon when he stopped abruptly on the gravel path, the crunch of his boots the only sound in the oppressive heat. His voice, sharp and decisive, cut through my reverie. "The study, Watson. We must return to the study at once. I have been a fool, looking for what I could hear, when the serpent feels what it cannot," Sherlock Holmes noted. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode towards the late Herr Vanderfort's private quarters. I followed, long accustomed to his abrupt changes of course. The heavy teak door creaked open, revealing the room just as we had left it, a tomb of dark wood and leather, the air still thick with the chemical tang of camphor. The silence within was profound, broken only by the incessant hum of insects beyond the shuttered windows. Holmes did not pace, as was his custom. Instead, he moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his hawk-like eyes scanning every surface, not for what was present, but for what was subtly amiss. He passed the desk, its papers still in disarray, and ignored the great leather chair where the unfortunate man had met his end. His attention fixed upon a tall glass-fronted cabinet housing a collection of delicate blue and white porcelain. "Come here, Watson," he murmured, his voice low and intense. "And tread lightly," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I approached, my steps muffled by the thick Persian rug. He pointed a long, slender finger not at the porcelain itself, but at the dark mahogany shelf, where a fine layer of grey dust lay undisturbed. To my eye, it was nothing remarkable. To Holmes, a revelation. "Do you see it? Here, just before the base of this Ming piece. It is not a smudge, nor the mark of a duster. Observe the pattern," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. I bent closer, holding my breath. In the faint light filtering through the shutters, I saw what he meant. Within the uniform film of dust was a series of impossibly fine, concentric ripples, like the ghost of a wave that had lapped against the porcelain and receded. It was a pattern of immense delicacy, clearly not made by any human hand. "Good heavens, Holmes," I whispered, "what could cause such a thing? A tremor in the earth?" Dr. John Watson commented. A flicker of a smile touched his lips. "Precisely the right question, my dear fellow, if not precisely the right cause. We shall see." He straightened and moved to the center of the room, his eyes fixed on the floorboards. "A demonstration is in order." He knelt, placing one hand flat against the polished wood, as if taking the pulse of the house itself. Then, with the heel of his other hand, he delivered a single sharp rap, stated Sherlock Holmes. The sound was a dull thud, swiftly absorbed by the room's profound stillness. Yet, as my eyes darted back to the shelf, I saw it. For the briefest instant, the fine grey dust shivered. It danced, coalescing into a faint yet undeniable echo of the pattern we had discovered. The porcelain itself had not visibly moved, but it had transmitted a vibration, writing its signature upon the dust. He rose to his feet, brushing a speck of dust from his trousers. His face was alight with the fierce energy of the hunter who has finally struck the trail. A current of air could not create such a pattern. A human touch would have smeared it. But a specific, rhythmic vibration, Watson, a vibration passing through the very bones of this house, that is another matter entirely, Sherlock Holmes said. He fell silent again, his gaze distant, as if he were listening to a sound no one else could hear. For a long moment he stood thus, motionless. The pieces were falling into place within that extraordinary mind, and I knew we stood upon the threshold of the solution. The mystic had spoken of serpents and the folly of men who trust only their ears. In that dusty, silent room I began to understand. We were not hunting a ghost, but the architect of a silent, invisible orchestra. The last of the fine porcelain dust settled back upon the shelf. Its brief, rhythmic dance concluded with a silence so profound you could almost hear it. Holmes remained crouched, his hawk-like profile silhouetted against the oppressive afternoon light, a thick yellow haze filtering through the window slats. The air in the late Herr von der Fort's study was thick, heavy with the cloying scent of camphor and the faint, dry smell of old paper. Outside, the world seemed to hold its breath. Even the ceaseless drone of insects had fallen to a low, respectful murmur. He rose in a single, fluid motion, a familiar fire kindling in the depths of his grey eyes. For a long moment he said nothing, his gaze sweeping the room, not as one who seeks, but as one who confirms. He began to pace, and I noted how his soft leather shoes, which so often tapped an impatient rhythm on the flagstones of Baker Street, made absolutely no sound upon the heavy teak floorboards. It is all of a piece, Watson. Every seemingly disparate element is but a single thread in the same monstrous tapestry, Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The dust, Holmes? The vibration? Dr. John Watson commented. The dust is merely the effect, not the cause. It is the footprint of the killer, as it were. But we must begin at the beginning. The camphor, Watson. Consider the camphor. Why so much of it? To purify the air? No, it is a masking agent, replied Sherlock Holmes. He paused before a heavy mahogany desk, tapping a long, thin finger upon its polished surface. The sharp, dry tick, tick of his nail against the wood was the only sound in the room. Each tap a deliberate punctuation mark in his silent train of thought. To mask what? The scent of a local spice? A cheap cigar? Hardly. One uses such a powerful agent to conceal an equally powerful and unnatural odor. The smell of hot oil, Watson. The exhalation of a machine. My mind struggled to grasp the connection. A machine? Here, in this quiet plantation house? It seemed a wild conjecture. As if reading my very thoughts, he turned to me, his expression one of intense concentration. Then we come to the death itself. Van der Voort, a man with a documented cardiac infirmity, is found dead. No marks, no poison, nothing but a look of sheer terror upon his face. The local physician, a man of limited imagination, concludes he was frightened to death. And what, pray, was the agent of this terror? A gamelan of ghosts, an orchestra with no musicians. He laughed then, a dry, mirthless sound, devoid of humour. It was the sound of a mind that had, at last, seen the solution to a particularly vexing problem. They were looking for a sound, Watson, when they should have been considering its opposite. The servants heard nothing, because there was nothing for the human ear to hear. This was not an assault on the senses, but on the very structure of the body. The dust danced to a rhythm, a steady, low-frequency pulse transmitted through the very foundations of this house. A vibration so low, a subsonic note, that it is not heard, but felt. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. A cold dread crept up my spine. The silence in the room seemed to deepen, to become a heavy, listening thing, as the sheer, diabolical brilliance of the scheme became clear. He was no longer pacing, but stood perfectly still in the centre of the room, the master of his domain. Imagine it, my dear fellow, a silent orchestra playing a single, deadly note. A note tuned to resonate with human tissue, to create a sympathetic vibration in the organs themselves, to shake a man's weak heart until it simply stops. It is the most ingenious and wicked method of murder I have ever encountered. Science in the service of pure malevolence, replied Sherlock Holmes. The logic was unassailable, the conclusion both fantastic and terrifyingly simple. The ghost story was stripped away, its ethereal whispers silenced by the hum of cold, hard physics. Holmes's gaze drifted downwards, his eyes fixed upon the floorboards at his feet. Such a machine would require power and a solid foundation to absorb the recoil of its own force. It would have to be anchored to the very earth. The engine is not in this room. It is below us. Come, Watson, let us pay a visit to the wine cellar, replied Sherlock Holmes. My friend Sherlock Holmes later recounted to me, with a grim satisfaction that I knew well, the events which followed his singular revelation in the dead man's study. Armed with the certainty that the gamelan of ghosts was no spectral chorus, but a product of terrestrial science, he took up a lantern and descended from the oppressive heat of the house into the cool, damp breath of the earth below. The stone steps leading to the wine cellar were slick with moisture, and each footfall sent back a flat, deadened echo from the oppressive dark. The air was thick with the scent of mouldering earth and sour spilled wine. Racks of dusty bottles, like coffin soldiers in their crypt, lined the walls. A persistent drip of water from some unseen fissure provided the only sound, a maddeningly regular clock marking time in the gloom. Holmes swept the lantern's beam across the packed earth floor, his eyes searching, not for a clue, but for the confirmation of a theory already fully formed in his mind. He murmured aloud, his voice a low whisper that scarcely disturbed the profound silence. The vibration must have a source, a solid, anchored source. It must be transmitted through the very foundation of this house, through the stone itself. A ghost may pass through walls, but a subsonic frequency requires an engine, stated Sherlock Holmes. He began a methodical tapping of the walls, his knuckles producing a series of dull thuds against the stone. He worked his way along the far wall, past racks of ancient claret and port, until his rapping suddenly produced a different sound, not a dead thud, but a hollow, resonant boom. It was a subtle distinction, one that my own ear would surely have missed. As he pressed his palm against the section of wall, a low groan of stressed timber answered him from the rack of bottles to his right. He took a single swift step back. There followed a catastrophic splintering of wood and a tremendous cascading crash of shattering glass. A river of dark wine flooded across the floor, its sharp aroma cutting through the musty air as hundreds of bottles, freed from their century of slumber, met their end upon the stones. The sound was deafening in the confined space, a final, violent protest from the collapsing rack. When the last shard of glass had ceased its skittering, Holmes raised his lantern again. The destruction had revealed what it was designed to conceal, a small iron lever, rusted and dark against the grey stone, set deep within the wall. He grasped it, and with a great effort that spoke of long disuse, pulled it downwards. A deep grinding noise, the sound of stone grating upon stone, filled the cellar as a section of the floor just before him began to retract, revealing a black and yawning cavity. He descended a short flight of expertly cut steps into a chamber utterly unlike the cellar above. It was dry, brick-lined, and no larger than a ship's cabin. In the centre, bolted to a massive stone plinth, was the source of the spectral music. It was a machine of exquisite and terrible beauty. A great flywheel of polished steel turned a series of complex gears, which drove a piston of gleaming brass. It was no steam engine, for there was no boiler. Rather, it appeared to be a form of internal combustion engine, yet of a design so advanced and compact as to be utterly alien. Copper coils and strange tuning fork-like resonators completed the device. It looked like some malevolent scientific instrument. His voice, when he later described it, was filled with a reluctant awe. It was a masterpiece of acoustic engineering, a silent orchestra indeed, designed not to be heard by the ear, but to be felt by the heart itself. To build such a thing, it would require not a common brute, but a genius, a man of science, Watson, a true artist of death, replied Sherlock Holmes. The discovery of the infernal machine had left me profoundly agitated, yet Holmes, upon our return to his Spartan quarters, possessed a chilling calm. The humid Javanese night pressed in, thick with the scent of frangipani and decay. Outside, the ceaseless thrum of insects formed a monotonous orchestra, against which the sharp rustle of the papers in my friend's hands seemed unnaturally loud. He had spent the hours since our discovery poring over telegrams and documents procured from the mainland by means I dared not ask. For a long while the only sounds were the scratch of his pen and the sigh of palm fronds against the veranda. At last he looked up, his grey eyes alight with the cold fire I knew so well. He held a flimsy yellow telegram aloft. "The last piece of the mechanism, Watson, though this one is forged of paper and ink. My inquiries to the Netherlands have borne fruit. Our seemingly indolent heir, Peter van der Voort, is not merely a dabbler in the arts. He is a graduate of the Delft University of Technology, where he took first-class honors in mechanical engineering, with a specialization in acoustics, explained Sherlock Holmes. The words fell into the quiet room with immense weight. The subterranean engine, a device of such malevolent ingenuity, now had its creator. The fop with the silken handkerchief and lazy smile was a brilliant engineer, a master of the forces he had unleashed. Good heavens, Holmes! Then he had not only the motive of inheritance, but the capability, wondered Dr. John Watson. Capability, yes, but the motive is deeper and far darker than mere avarice. His voice had lost its triumphant edge, replaced by a graver tone. He set aside the telegram and picked up a bundle of brittle, yellowed letters tied with a faded ribbon. These are from the mission archives. They tell a story Heer van der Voort took great pains to erase, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. He fell silent as he read, his long fingers tracing the faded script. The oil lamp cast his sharp features into a mask of shadow and light, revealing not the thrill of the chase, but a profound and weary sadness. Peter's mother was a local woman of some standing. His uncle, in his younger days, took her as his mistress. It seems it was a genuine attachment for a time. But when it became inconvenient, when a Dutch bride was sought to secure his fortune, he cast her aside without a second thought. She and the boy, Peter, were turned out. She died a few years later in abject poverty, while her son was sent away, his education a paltry price to pay for his silence. The ghastly affair was suddenly illuminated, not by the cold light of logic, but by the fire of a grievance so deep it had smouldered for 2 decades. This was not a murder for inheritance. It was an act of filial vengeance, executed with the terrifying precision of a scientific mind. Holmes rose and walked to the open window, gazing into the impenetrable blackness of the plantation. The night air that drifted in did little to cool the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper, and it carried a note of moral ambiguity I had seldom heard from him. To hunt down a common murderer, Watson, is a simple matter of public duty. But to bring to the gallows a man who has merely served as the instrument of a terrible and long-delayed justice, that is a different problem altogether. Tell me, Doctor, when the law fails so profoundly, who is the true criminal? The tyrant or the man who silences him? The study was an oven, the air thick with the scent of stale tobacco, and the cloying perfume of frangipani drifting through the shuttered windows. The drone of insects outside, a ceaseless, monotonous hum, frayed the nerves. 2 stout Dutch officials, sweating profusely in their starched collars, shifted their weight from foot to foot, their impatience a palpable force in the room. Opposite them, near the desk where his uncle had met his end, sat Peter van der Voort. He alone seemed immune to the oppressive heat, his posture relaxed, his expression one of mild curiosity. Holmes stood by the collection of Javanese instruments that lined one wall, his long fingers tracing the intricate carvings on a brass gong. He had been silent for a full 5 minutes, a silence broken only by the creak of the floorboards and the agitated breathing of the colonial officers. Finally he turned, his grey eyes sweeping over us all. Gentlemen, we have been pursuing a ghost. We have listened to tales of a spectral gamelan, an orchestra of the damned that plays a prelude to death. The mistake, you see, is in assuming that an orchestra requires musicians, or indeed that it must be audible to every ear, stated Sherlock Holmes. One of the officials grunted sceptically. Holmes paid him no mind, his gaze now fixed upon the heavy teak desk. Here Van der Voort suffered from a severe cardiac arrhythmia. His heart was, to put it plainly, a fragile instrument. Any great shock could have silenced it forever. But this was not a shock of sight or conventional sound. It was a shock of resonance, explained Sherlock Holmes. He moved through the room with a quiet energy, his voice precise and clear, as if lecturing in a theatre of crime. He pointed towards the floor beneath the desk, then to the heavy metal legs of the chair. Every object possesses a natural frequency at which it vibrates. It is a concept well understood by engineers. If you can produce a vibration at that precise frequency, even a subtle one, transmitted through a solid medium, you can induce a sympathetic resonance. The object will begin to shake, sometimes violently. Consider a bridge collapsing under the measured tread of marching soldiers, or a wine-glass shattering at a specific note from a violin, Sherlock Holmes said. A flicker of understanding and perhaps admiration crossed Peter's face. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on Holmes. The Dutch officials merely looked bewildered. Now, apply that principle not to glass or steel, but to a diseased human heart. An infrasonic pulse, a sound so low it cannot be heard, but can be felt, was directed into this room. Transmitted through the very foundations of the house from a device in the cellars below, it was calibrated to the precise resonant frequency of Herr van der Voort's damaged cardiac tissue. To him, sitting in this specific chair, at this specific desk, the effect would have been terrifying. A violent internal vibration, a phantom percussion played upon the very strings of his life. He was, in effect, shaken to death from the inside out, replied Sherlock Holmes. A horrified silence filled the room, broken only by the incessant buzzing from the jungle. Holmes let the weight of his words settle before his sharp gaze locked onto the young engineer. A masterful application of acoustic science. It required a profound knowledge of physics, an engineer's skill, and a motive born of deep and terrible grievance. The creator of this silent orchestra, the composer of this concerto for the condemned, was you, Herr Peter van der Voort, Sherlock Holmes noted. The officials gasped, one taking a half-step forward. But Peter did not flinch. He did not deny the charge. A slow, thin smile touched his lips, a chilling expression of pure intellectual pride. His voice, when he finally spoke, was not that of a cornered criminal, but of an artist acknowledging applause. It was elegant, was it not? No poison, no weapon, no trace, just a vibration in the air. A ghost of my own making, singing a song only he could feel. He deserved no less, Peter van der Voort replied. Peter van der Voort's admission hung in the humid air of the study, as tangible as the scent of teak and dried spices. There was no outburst, no struggle. He stood with a peculiar, almost serene dignity as the two Dutch colonial officials, summoned by Holmes an hour prior, stepped forward. The heavy, rhythmic tread of their boots upon the polished floorboards was the only sound to break the profound silence. Holmes's voice, when it came, was devoid of triumph, possessing instead the flat, dispassionate tone of a lecturer concluding a proof. "You have your confession, gentlemen. The method, as I have outlined, was not supernatural, but a masterful application of acoustic science. A resonant frequency, precisely targeted, generated by instruments hidden within the very walls of this house. A silent orchestra, indeed, that played a tune only its victim's heart could hear," Sherlock Holmes responded. The senior official, a stout man with a face weathered by the tropical sun, merely grunted and gestured with his chin. Young Peter offered his wrists without a word, his gaze fixed not on his captors, but upon the portrait of his Javanese mother that hung above the mantelpiece. As they led him from the room, his footsteps were light, a stark contrast to the official's leaden pace. The great door of the mansion closed with a deep, final boom that echoed through the halls. For a long moment Holmes stood by the window, looking out not at the manicured lawns, but at some distant point only he could see. The cicadas had begun their evening chorus, a high, incessant hum that seemed to make the very air vibrate. "A grim business, Holmes, but a necessary one. Justice has been served," remarked Dr. John Watson. He turned from the window, his face a mask of profound weariness. A faint breeze stirred the papers on the dead man's desk, their dry rustle a hushed murmur in the quiet room. "Has it, Watson? Has it, truly? We have served a law, certainly. A colonial court will convene. They will see the undeniable evidence of a cleverly executed murder, and they will hang Peter van der Voort for it. They will see the crime in all its intricate detail," Sherlock Holmes noted. He began to pace, his movements sharp and agitated, a stark departure from his earlier calm. "But they will be blind, Watson, utterly blind to the cause. They will not see the decades of quiet cruelty, the degradation of a woman, the slow, meticulous poisoning of a son's soul. They will hear of the motive, avenging his mother, and dismiss it as some native grievance, a savage passion. They will weigh a monster's life against a brilliant mind, and find them equal on their scales. Tell me, is that justice, or is it merely the tidying of an account book?" observed Sherlock Holmes. "Good heavens, Holmes, what else could you have done? The law is the law, however imperfect. You cannot place yourself above it," Dr. John Watson replied. He stopped and looked at me, his grey eyes piercing. "Oh, but I could, my dear fellow, and I have. I gave the officials the how, for it is a thing of science they can comprehend. The what is self-evident, but the why, the full and terrible why of it all, that I have kept for myself. It is a matter for a higher court than any man can convene in Batavia. They have their killer. Let that suffice," Sherlock Holmes said. The implication struck me with the force of a physical blow. My thoughts spun. Holmes, the unwavering agent of the law, had deliberately withheld the very heart of the matter, not from failure, but from choice. He had passed a sentence of his own upon the system itself. As we turned to take our leave, I saw a figure standing silently in the grand doorway, framed by the deepening twilight. It was Raden Sala, the old mystic. No words passed between them. The old man's dark, knowing eyes met Holmes's across the room. In that shared gaze there was no judgment, only a profound and silent understanding. Holmes gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgment. It was a recognition of a different kind of balance, a justice of ghosts and echoes that our English laws, for all their supposed might, could never hope to comprehend.